All right, good morning, everyone. First, there are a few housekeeping rules. Q&A will be addressed at the end. However, please use the Q&A function to ask your questions throughout the discussion. There will be a quick poll before Q&A. The poll is to help us build better content for you all. So let's get started. I'm excited for you all to join us in this first episode of our four-part webinar series called Modern Data. In this webinar series, Mode and our friends at Sisu will discuss how to go from insight to decisions faster with a modern data stack. This topic is so important and complex that we've decided to break the conversation into four critical parts. Throughout these discussions, we hope you, the audience, will gain best practices for building a modern data stack and other related interesting topics to the analyst community. If you're interested in learning about the other topics, please go to our resources page under modern data, sign up for all or specific ones that you're interested in. To kick off our first discussion, I would like to introduce our two speakers for this episode, focusing on modular data stack. Sid Sharma and John Kelly, thank you for joining. The floor is yours, and would you please introduce yourself?
Great. Thank you, Ian. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on the case for a modular data stack. My name is Johnny Kelly, and I'm a member of the solutions engineering team at Mode. I have the privilege of working with our customers, some of you may be on this webinar, to help you gain insights from your data. I'll be your host for today's live chat, and to kick off this first of the four-part webinar series between Mode and Sisu, I'm very excited to be joined today by a friend of mine, a guest who is a familiar name in the data ecosystem and has a lot of experience helping data teams extract value out of their data. I'll let him introduce himself. Sid, thank you for joining us today. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and where you work?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Johnny, and everyone else joining in today. My name is Sid Sharma, and I am a part of the solutions engineering team at Sisu. In this role, I help companies evaluate our product from a technical standpoint pre-sales, and also help them be successful on the tool post-sales. I often get to wear the hat of a consultant or a trusted partner to these companies, helping them answer questions on their data stack or suggest new tools according to their business needs. Before Sisu, I was actually at Mode, pretty much doing the same thing. So I used to sit right next to Johnny. And so I've worked with the majority of the 600 plus Mode customers, helping them get up and running with the tool. Before Mode, I was an analytics consultant for a couple of companies for close to 5 years.
Great. Thanks again for joining us today, Sid. I'm really excited to speak with you today about this topic that I've been hearing a lot about, data stacks. But before we talk about data stacks, Sid, I'm curious to hear from your perspective. Can you tell us what exactly is a stack?
Yeah, so the concept of a stack comes from a related concept in software engineering called technology stack. And a technology stack is nothing but a combination of technology services used to build and run one single application. So as an example, Facebook uses a combination of coding frameworks and languages, including JavaScript, HTML, PHP, and React.js. And so all of these frameworks and technologies become Facebook's front-end tech stack. Now the question is, why is building technology in a stack-like fashion important? So what happens is when you put together discrete tools or frameworks that do one thing and do it really well, and also play well with tools that come before and after them, you get two important benefits. The first is customizability, and the second is interchangeability. Or in other words, you can customize your stack or your solution to your own unique needs, taking into account your available time, resources, and budget. And when you need a new functionality, you don't have to replace the entire stack. You can just rip out that one portion of the stack with something that's much better.
Yeah, I love that idea, right? Customizability and interchangeability. I think these are the two key points that we're going to be focusing on today. But Before we chat about those two things, Sid, let's move on to the actual topic at hand, data stacks. What exactly is a data stack, and why is having one important?
Yeah, so at the most basic level, a data stack is nothing but a combination of technology services, just like the software stack. But in this case, that help a business collect, store, combine, analyze, and ultimately realize the value of data. It's sort of a link between raw data and business insights. And this pattern of modular data stack started becoming prominent, I want to say like 5 to 7 years ago, at least, based on what I noticed at the most data informed companies like Airbnb and Uber. And leveraging a modular architecture allowed these companies to scale efficiently by picking and choosing the best tools to solve discrete problems without disrupting the whole system as a whole. Now, before I get into the specifics of the stack, I'd like to add a disclaimer that this is, just purely how I see the stack based on my experience and working with big and small companies that I have worked with in the past few years. Okay, so if you take a look at the slide, the first step of the data stack is what I call specification and collection. And what that means is defining what events you want to track in the first place, and then using a tool to ingest and process those events. So let's take an example. Let's say that I'm an e-commerce website, and one of the events is checkout completed. And I can define properties associated with this event, things like user ID, user device type, event date, operating system, etc. And once I've created this whole schema of events and their associated properties, I can then sort of link it to my app's backend and then ingest all of this event data into a warehouse. And there are very specific companies that let you do that in a very efficient manner. And so the top one there is Segment. GCP, Google Cloud, also has a PubSub service, and AWS also has a managed service that lets you sort of collect and specify all of the events that you can then bring the data into your warehouse with. That's the first step. The second step is extraction and loading. And so while analytical events serve as the primary source of data, oftentimes they're not enough in themselves to sort of give you a complete picture of what's going on in the business as a whole. And that's when you bring in data from your CRM systems like Salesforce or your HR systems, and then sort of augment your existing event data with this data to give you a 360-degree view of the customer or of your business. And integrating all of these data sources by yourself is usually very, very challenging. And that's because different sources have different data formats and different APIs. So it doesn't really make sense for you to write your own integrations unless you're really pressed on budget. And so some of the tools that help this part of the data stack are Fivetran is a big one, and Stitch is the other big one. Okay, so now that we are done with the first two steps, let's pick a warehouse, which is actually extremely important and the talk of the town today specifically.
Yeah.
The warehouse is the place where you sort of store, transform, and serve all of your data to your different stakeholders from. And so it's, I think, the most important part of the data stack, and how you pick your warehouse will dictate a lot of things, including pricing, which is a big one. And so some of the key features that you should take a look at are things like scalability, price elasticity, speed, and querying performance. And the big three players here are AWS Redshift, BigQuery by Google, and then the third one is Snowflake, which just went public, I think a few minutes ago, I guess.
Yep.
And so once you have that code warehouse, you can then add additional options. So one of the options is that you can supplement your warehouse with Spark or Databricks if you have sophisticated machine learning related workflows. The other layer could be something like Druid or Imply, which serves as an ultra fast serving layer on top of your warehouse. And so this is the third step, how you pick your warehouse. The fourth step is called the transformation or the governance layer. And so now that you're able to collect all of your data into the warehouse, the next step is to clean the data, merge the data, and aggregate that raw data into something that can be used by business stakeholders or your analyst teams. And so a lot of people call this layer as the business logic layer. In an early days of a company, you might be able to write raw SQL in your BI tool and then sort of create these logical cubes on the fly. But usually what happens is as your business grows, you need more and more sophisticated logic built in into these systems. And so those one-off SQL scripts and cron jobs usually fail. And that's when you need tools like DBT, Trifactor to a large extent, and Data IQ to sort of form the base of your data transformation layer. Now, lately there's been a lot of talk around quality assurance and data cataloging, how you catalog all of your column names and stuff like that. And I've seen a lot of open source and commercial products pop up in this space. So one of them is Monte Carlo Data, which I think just got Series A funding today, this morning, I was reading in the news. The other one is Great Expectations, and so on and so forth. So I think that'll be like an interesting space to look out for in the near future. And then the last step is once you've transformed all of your raw data into these golden transform tables, you got to analyze that data, right? So it's the last mile, so to say. And so there are three different types of analysis tool, the way I look at it. The first is dashboarding and self-serve analytics platforms. The second is data diagnostic platform that let you answer those sophisticated ad hoc questions on top of millions of rows. And third are tools like H2O.ai and DataRobot that let you do that core machine learning or data science workflows in a very efficient manner. So those are, I think, the 5 like broad steps end to end inside any sophisticated modern data stack. Now, coming to the second part of your question, why is it important? Why do we even need to build a data stack, right? So we currently live in the age of data. It's no surprise. And businesses today have access to so much information that holds the potential to drive a lot of business value. But with that promise, there is a very real problem to create the infrastructure that's going to enable that, business value. Think of it this way. If data is an essential resource, like let's say water, then a data stack is a series of pipes that bring it to your house. And just like a building needs good plumbing, every business that wants to tap into this wealth of data must set up the underlying infrastructure to make it available. And that's what the data stack is. Yeah, I think, does that make sense? I would love to know from your perspective, how have you seen the companies that you've worked with sort of think about this, data stack and navigate it?
Yeah, I really love that analogy. I want to highlight that last thing you said, Sid, that last point of, data is this essential resource like water. Clearly, companies are starting to understand this with Snowflake going public today that you mentioned, and all these companies raising these series fundings. And I think 2 key themes really stand out from what you just said that really resonate with me. The first is that customizability piece. So I definitely agree with you. The transformation layer is super key here. In fact, I think a lot of our customers use DBTs, for example, for that transformation because it focuses particularly on that governance layer. Kind of like you said, how it allows you to define different business domains. And as your business gets more complex, it provides the flexibility or customizability to grow. So I think that's one big piece that you pulled out that I wanted to highlight. And the second one, really quickly, is just the interchangeability. I would argue that interchangeability is actually really tied to the word modern here, and this is our modern data webinar series. So the fact that there are options out there in the world for every layer that you just described gives the power to the builder of the modern data stack. And it makes that person much more free and open to choose, what works best for them. So really appreciate that insight, Sid. And it's clear that, as we move forward, this modern data stack seems to be the future. So let's move on to the implementation side of things. When should a company typically look to build a data stack?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So let me think. Typically, when companies are preparing to build the modern data stack that we talked about, they usually fall into two different categories. The first one is that a very small company who don't have any infrastructure whatsoever and are starting from a clean slate. And the second bucket are organizations that have systems of the previous generation that are not cutting it anymore. And so let's start with the first bucket, companies who are starting from zero. If you are a company that falls into this category, you might already have some types of reports available. For example, a retailer might have a point of sale system that gives them access to aggregated reports like sales trend by product, by region, etc. These data points, number one, come in aggregated fashion, and number two, they are delivered in very discrete batches. So if the business stakeholder asks you any follow-up question, these primitive systems usually break down. And so a modern data stack can fill that information gap and provide fresh, granular data that can then be used to surface automated insights that can make an immediate impact on the company goals. That's number one. Another problem that I've seen a lot of like first-time companies face is bringing multiple data sets together in one place to see that 360-degree view of the business or the customer. So that's like one bucket of companies. The second bucket, or the second group of companies, are companies that need to rebuild their data stack. And usually these companies, oftentimes they know the value that the data provides, but either don't have the skills in-house or the time needed to sort of make the switch from a tool of the previous generation to a tool in the modern data stack. And what these companies need to realize is that the more they delay the move over to the modern stack, the more time they'll spend in a broken reactive queue of data requests. And so one of the main benefits for companies in this bucket is that a modern data stack will empower the data analysts to become more proactive rather than being reactive. And so the analyst can spend their time and efforts on high leverage projects that truly drive business value. So to your question, when an organization recognizes it's time to invest in a more comprehensive data stack, I think it's clear to everyone, to the consumers of the data, and especially to the leadership who is usually frustrated because they can't get to the insights in a timely manner.
Yeah, completely agree. I think as a data analyst myself, I think about the idea of being proactive versus reactive and trying to stay ahead of some of these questions that are coming in and providing answers as quickly as possible so that, to your point, making an immediate impact on those company goals, I think is very important, no matter what stage you are as a company. And then also having that 360-degree view of the business, I think is really important there too. So Sid, I'm curious also, as companies embark on this journey to build their data stacks, are there some high failure points that they should be aware of?
Yeah, there's like so many of them. Okay, so the two big ones that come to my mind right now. The first one is, sometimes, or actually a lot of times, the schema of the source will change. A new column will get added, or something will change in the source data in a way that all of the downstream applications will not be able to handle that correctly. So making sure that your ELT processes have the appropriate tests in place to identify and manage these changes as soon as they happen is a big one, I think. Another common mistake is the last mile problem, which is I see a lot of companies using a BI tool for ad hoc analyses or data diagnostic analytics. And so more and more companies are realizing now that BI tools and that workflow of like a dashboard is just not built to diagnose data problems and test like hundreds of thousands of hypotheses in minutes. BI dashboard is usually a window to your data. It's not built for this, back and forth ad hoc diagnostic type analyses that a lot of companies and a lot of problems require, in real time. So I think those are the two big ones that I would say.
Nice. Yeah, so I think now we can kind of segue into Mode and Sisu in this world, right? Or better yet, Sid, I hear you have put together a demo for us that showcases how Mode and Sisu work side by side. Is that right?
Yeah, something like that, like a quick vignette demo of
A
sort.
vignette. Cool. So while you're pulling up that demo, let's discuss how Mode and Sisu fit into the data stack. So both Mode and Sisu sit at the end of the data stack, that fifth step that Sid talked about. And if data is the water, that analogy that Sid brought up before, you can think of Mode and Sisu as sort of the cups that help us consume that water or the data. Mode allows people to explore their data in ways that they perhaps could not before. And if you think about those questions, Sid, that you brought up before, the what, the why, and the what's next, I think Mode helps get at those answers quickly, giving you that immediate business impact on those company goals that we mentioned before. And that's actually, why Sid and I are talking today, and why you are all tuning in. We're all looking for that business impact. And where Mode is great at giving you the tools to explore the why and the predicting of what's next, Sisu actually augments this process, which I'll let Sid show you all now.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I start sharing my screen, I just want to recap on two big points that you raised. The first one is that all of the BI tools all of the analysis tool fall in three different categories. You have a BI tool that tells you the what. You have things like H2O.ai, Data Robot, that help you predict in the future. But then there is this upcoming third category of tools, which help you with the data diagnostic, only helping you answer the why. Why is my metric changing? The metric that I saw in my BI dashboard. And that's where Sisu comes in. So let me go ahead and share my screen and add some color to what I'm talking about. Can you see my screen okay, Johnny?
Yes, I can.
Okay, awesome. So I took this like dummy data set, which is at a transaction level. So every row in this data table is a transaction. And then I have a bunch of different columns. I have things like transaction channel, things like customer ID, who is the customer that made that purchase. Then I have columns like loyalty program, customer demographics like gender and age, things like coupon code, ad shown, the purchase time, and the purchase date. So a very standard sort of retail transaction level data set. And one of the columns in here is the transaction amount. And this is what I care about as a business, if I am a retail or an e-commerce company. And so what I've done here is I've created a Mode report, a retail ops dashboard, a report of sort that lets me track average transaction amount by different metrics. So in the first chart, you can see that I'm tracking the average transaction amount over time. And then I'm slicing the same metric by different dimensions, things like coupon code, by store city, by gender, and by referrer, and so on and so forth. And then I've also added a bunch of different filters. Now, in a real life scenario, if I'm an operations analyst, I see that something happened in December where my metric dropped a little bit from December to Jan of 2019. And I need to diagnose what's going on. And so if I were to replicate what people can actually do on this dashboard to diagnose this problem, I can, number one, slice it by different variations of my customer and see if something pops up. So maybe Louisville is not doing well. I can also do the same thing with referrer. I can also like try to eyeball the different dimensions I have. So my point is there are different ways that I can slice and dice my data by. And I, as a business stakeholder or an analyst, don't have the time to actually diagnose because I have a bunch of different factors in my data. And that's exactly where Sisu comes in. So once I've identified what's wrong or what needs diagnosis, I can hyperlink this Mode dashboard into what we call a Sisu objective. And so this is a Sisu objective set up on top of the exact same data. So at a high level, it tells us that the metric that we were tracking decreased from $47.69 to 44.83 cents. So it was a decrease of 6%. And what it also allows us to do is take a look at the underlying subpopulations where the change in average was the most prominent. And we do this by creating or calculating rather an impact for you. Or in other words, all of my loyalty program is equal to silver customers who use this coupon code. For them, the change in average was actually a good jump of 7.3x. And they impacted the business positively by $8. So if I did not have these silver customers who use the coupon code in my underlying data, my overall metric would have further dropped by $8. So as you can see here that Sisu already computes, as you can see here that we've computed close to 400 million combinations across all of your rows and columns, not just for first order facts, but second and even third order facts. And then we stack rank them in their decreasing order of impact for you. So you as an analyst can quickly point out where the areas of problematic, business value are. And then you can again go back to mode and then maybe create a Python plot that predicts based on those factors that you've identified in Sisu. So in a lot of ways, I think Sisu and mode are intertwined. Mode helps you, get to the what, looking at a dashboard. Once you want to diagnose a problem, you jump into Sisu. That automatically lets the machine, run all the permutations and combinations in all of my factors, quickly point out the topmost impacting factors. And once I've identified those factors, I can come back in and then maybe create a report around those 3 factors and share it with my business stakeholders. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think calling out that end bit, I was going to harp on that one more time, and we can touch on it right before we end. But that idea of answering the what, the why, and the what's next, and how Mode and Sisu do that very well together. So thank you for that, and thank you for the brief vignette. Really appreciate that, and it feels like I'm sitting right next to you back at the Mode office again, where we used to work. So appreciate it. In this webinar series, do want to remind everyone, there will be more ways that we'll show you how Mode and Sisu get at those questions, the what, the why, and the what's next quickly. But to wrap up today's discussion, Sid, let's leave our audience with a few key takeaways from today's discussion. So the first, data is an essential resource like water, right? And Mode and Sisu are those cups that help us digest the water or consume the data, right? And then another key point that I want to leave you all with is these 2 key benefits of modularity: customizability and interchangeability. And then finally, Mode and Sisu help us answer these 3 key business questions: the what, the why, and the what's next. So with that, thank you, Sid, for joining and sharing your knowledge with us today. Really appreciate it. As a reminder for our audience, this webinar is the first in a series of webinars on modern data. I invite you all to tune into our next webinar on October 6th, where we will be discussing augmented and exploratory analytics, not dashboards. And Hien, what questions have come in that we can answer?
Sure. There's a few questions in the Q&A I can ask. The first ones is, from one of our audiences. I brought into the vision the modern data stack, but it's not a priority for the executive team. What should I do? Sid, you wanna take that one?
Yeah, I think that's a fairly common question that I've heard so many times. Okay, so if your leadership team doesn't want to switch from the current process, I think that can usually be attributed to one of 2 reasons, right? The first one could be that your leaders have bigger company goals to meet, and they just don't see how unlocking the full potential of data will actually help them with those goals. So that's the first reason why they are not so serious about it. The second reason could be that they think that the current tools and processes are good enough. And so I think it's a general human tendency to resist change of any sort. And so the way I would approach this would be to make a business case or any tool that you're planning to introduce to your company. And oftentimes this requires tying it back to a business impact of some sort and painting what I call the art of the possible. How will this tool directly help you get to the bigger company goals that you have, Mr. or Mrs. Miss Executive? So those are the 2 ways in which I've navigated these conversations. And I think even when we were building Sisu, that concept of impact is something that was key to how we wanted to design the whole experience, tying everything back to business impact. Yeah.
Great. The other question I think our audience has raised is, where should governance live? I mean, the discussion is governance should live outside. Why and why should governance live outside of your BI tool?
Yeah, I can take this one. And Sid, feel free to add anything if I missed it. But I think so modeling and transformation should all live outside of the BI tool. And there are already tools out there that do this very well. And honestly, this is kind of why we're talking today. The modular data stack, it's a plethora of tools that do things very well. But with regards to governance, you know, the right people need to be able to access the right and view the right data that's relevant to them. And Mode was originally built to support whatever permissions were already set up in the database. I mean, we're creating more layers in our product that help with role-based access control on like the permission side, but I think our philosophy on data governance still remains. We want to give our customers the flexibility to put the right data in front of the right people at the right time. And so that's kind of where we stand. And Sid, I'm not sure if you had any thoughts on that either.
Yeah, I you know, agree to everything that you said. I just want to add one small like pro tip of sort, that a lot of times most like 95% of your business logic would live in that transformation layer. But then there will be times when you would be required to sort of model data on the fly in your SQL runner for a new business problem that you had not anticipated. And so once that comes up, there's no need to go back to the transformation layer at that point. You can create that cube on the fly in your BI tool. And then if you see that that cube is sort of solving for a reoccurring need, you can then solidify that and bring it into your transformation layer. So it can act as an experiment ground for the new requests that are coming in before you solidify that logic or code into your transformation layer.
Great. Another question is, oftentimes smaller companies are happy to buy the technology of a modern data stack, but frequently understaffed with smart people who know how to use Fivetran, Snowflake, Sisu, etc. How can we help make the case of analytics as an ongoing service, not thinking of having dashboard built and being done?
Yeah, this ties back to the one point that I raised earlier, that it's not a tooling problem. It's a mindset and a process problem, where a lot of times there are no processes in place and there's no leader who truly believes that data can solve whatever they're trying to do. So I think one way to approach that could be to start a small sort of demo pilot project for a month, keep it very scoped towards one end goal, and staff it appropriately, and use that as the business case that you use to go back to your business stakeholders. The other way could be that if you are not tight on budget, sort of allocating resources or hiring professional services consultants or analysts who can help you do that.
Excellent. There are two last questions. They're both actually for both of you actually. So how is Sisu and Mode different from Power BI, Tableau? And then these are two separate questions, but I'm merging them as one. And then similar, two different questions, but merging as one is, can you not leverage Sisu and Mode functionality in other BI tools, and why not? Do you both want to take that separately?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Johnny speak for Mode first, but I can speak as far as how Sisu fits in and what are the differentiating points vis-a-vis, I think, Tableau, Power BI, and all of the other tools that they raised.
Sure, and Sid, feel free to chime in here too, but I think in terms of the differentiators between Mode and Power BI and Tableau, I think the biggest one is the time to value and the idea that you can set up your SQL editor and queries in such a way that not only gives your end users the ability to explore the data more robustly, but also gives your data analysts the ability to go back and edit those queries in real time in one interface. I think that's one key thing to highlight there. Also, you know, the idea in the question of what's next or what do I do now? And in terms of predicting, I think one of the key features of Mode that's really highlighted here is our notebook functionality, in that you're able to pipe in Python and R predictability and predictive analytics into your regular workflow all in one place.
Got it. Now coming to Sisu and how is it different? So like I had mentioned, Sisu is only focused on solving just one problem, which is answering the why. And we believe that we are doing it better than anyone else in the market. And so I think it might help if I give some background on the company as a whole. How Sisu started was, it was a research project at Stanford's Dawn Lab. And it's the same lab where Tableau came out of in the early 2000s, where our CEO, who is also on the faculty at Stanford, did a bunch of research with these big companies and sort of created the underlying algorithm that computes millions and billions of combinations within seconds to, number one, tell you the top most impactful factors and then stack rank them in their decreasing order of impact. So I would say calculation of that impact and the fact that our secret sauce, so to say, is in the underlying algorithm, which is battle tested with these bigger companies like Microsoft, Facebook, and Netflix back at Stanford, is what truly makes the difference. And I think everything else depends on a use case by use case basis, but happy to talk in depth if anyone has a specific question for a specific use case.
Thank you both to Johnny and Sid. That concludes our webinar for today. As Johnny said, this conversation is very complex, so we broke into critical parts. If you're interested in other parts, please check our website mode under our resource page, and you can sign for specific one to find it all. But thank you so much. Hope you have a good day and please stay safe. Cheers.
Thank you. Thanks, Sid. Thanks, everyone.